because joy has a future orientation. It's not necessarily that you're happy in that moment, but you know that no, there's something greater.
I am here with Ekemini who is the author of the NAACP Image Award nominated book, Truth's Table, Black Women's Musings on Life, Love, and Liberation, co-host of the Truth's Table podcast, a public theologian, someone I just really enjoy talking to, and a professional and amateur human being who has been thinking a lot about purpose lately. What does it mean to have purpose? Why has this been on your mind recently?
Well, I think that thinking about, my own generation, millennials, thinking about Gen Z.
Let's go millennials.
Yeah, right. Rah, sis, kumbah. I feel like we're, and that's not to say anything about Gen X or boomers, but I've noticed that there's much more conscientiousness about the type of jobs we do, the goals and aspirations that we have.
You mean like more thoughtful about what happens?
Yeah, more thoughtful about where we put our money and our resources. It seems that there is a much more altruistic and purposeful approach to a lot of these areas of our lives.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, I just remember trying to find your purpose like being a big thing, like in college. And so it's something that I'm often, thinking about, and it's followed me for many years.
Right.
So.
I read recently that there's research, maybe we can link it in the show notes in case people don't believe me. No one will check, they'll just believe me. That in fact, that millennials have actually are sometimes stereotyped as having not gotten the right jobs or not done well professionally or financially, but actually research shows that they have done very well. I mean, not everyone obviously, but like as a group, as an aggregate age group, have actually done very well financially. So to your point about that kind of care, apparently it translates into something.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So much more conscientious about those things. And so, I remember being like, in college and at the time, I'm dating myself, but at that time, purpose-driven life.
Oh yeah.
Was, oh my God, took the whole country by storm.
People were giving me that book as like gifts. I had like 3 different people give it to me. It's like, why are people giving me this book?
Everywhere,
like, what do I look like? Do I look like a Gen Xer who has no purpose? Because I am. That is totally me.
It was everywhere, right? And so it was just really, this big explosion about that. And it was, early on in my college days. I remember my church was going through it. Everybody was, I mean, this is a Black church. The
Black church was doing purpose-driven life.
Yeah, mine was anyway. It really permeated, you know what I mean, the stratosphere, if you will.
Yeah.
And so which I don't think is a bad thing, but there was this pressure, I think, and there's what's your purpose? What are you doing? Do you know what you're gonna do? And it's like, I don't know, I'm only 19. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out my life. I don't know who I am.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of pressure, And so I just remember there's always just this almost after this obsession, it almost turned into an obsession. It's not the author's fault. It's just like purpose. I gotta find my purpose, or else I have no meaning. I gotta do something. Where people were starting to even despise maybe their profession. So say somebody who's a janitor, or she was trying to, you have purpose. You do that as unto the Lord. Your work is not more purposeful than the preacher, or the therapist, or So there was a weird. I don't know, some weird implications that I was seeing, as a result of that. And I remember being, we're anxious about what my purpose was.
Oh, absolutely. I'm really interested.
Why am I here?
I'm really interested in this idea that or this question, I guess. I wonder if this obsession, like you say, with purpose is a particular artifact, we might say, of the kind of modern moment we live in.
Right, yeah.
Whereas, like, I don't know, I just try to imagine, like let's say we lived 500 years ago. And let's say you live in a village somewhere. It's a pre-modern, a traditional society. It's like, I wonder if people there were like wringing their hands about their purpose.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder if they weren't, because first of all, there were like these rock solid traditional gender roles where nobody was, if you were a woman, I guess you were thinking not about careers in college, but like there was this thing. Obviously, to have gotten out of that for women is a pretty big deal. And I'm really grateful for it. But it also means like now there's this search for purpose where like I wonder if that occurred in the same way. I mean,
I'm
or
not sure.
for men, it's like, oh, my daddy was a blacksmith. Now I'm a blacksmith, or shoemaker. Now I'm a shoemaker.
Yeah,
it's like,
that's what we do.
I just do this thing. Am I going to move from my place? Absolutely not. What other place? Where else would I go? You know, unless you were forced to migrate for some reason, you just live in your place. So I wonder if it's an artifact of like this pressure to invent yourself like an individual, like a human being.
Yeah, like, is it a Western phenomenon?
Yeah.
You know, probably.
Probably.
You know, I mean,
everything. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
That.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, because I think also part of it, I wonder if it's tied to, well, I mean, this is a little anachronistic, but I just wonder if it's also tied to the ways in which we are now very much, you know, lonely, more individualized, you know, and more, more individualistic. And so it's like, I don't, you know, if it's like my family's not close by, I'm not within a tight knit community where people are not necessarily dependent on me to show up or to do this, you know, or these things. I wonder if, you know, this is a byproduct of that. You know, and having to, okay, so what am I here for then?
Well, you know, even somebody who's, I think, known as a conservative voice at the New York Times, David Brooks, had an article recently that was very popular saying, I think the headline was, or maybe it was in the Atlantic. We'll link it. We're linking all kinds of things today.
Link it up.
I think maybe it was in the Atlantic, but the headline was something like, the modern nuclear family has been a mistake. And the argument, was that taking yourself and just relying on this like family, this little nuclear group, and going off and living by yourself, and what is your family going to be, is an unnatural way to live. Yeah. Apart from other people in whom maybe you find a purpose.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
A different kind. I wonder if we could break this down into like 2 different life stages, just as a way to organize what is such a huge topic, right? Like finding purpose. One would be like this intense search that you've already alluded to that really occurs like in the teenage years and into college, like a first half of life kind of thing. And I think both you and I are maybe in the age zone where we could be the kind of people who could represent, you know, approaching that, maybe closer for me than you, but approaching that like midlife thing, where then on the second half we could think about this other half of life and we'll think a little bit ahead, you know, obviously there's only so much we can represent, but what it might look like to look for purpose in that other half of life where things are just really different. But about that first half, I wonder if you could talk more about what your search for purpose was like when you were 19, when you were in college. What did that look like?
When I was in the hot pressure cooker of purpose-driven life.
You were in the book study, the Bible.
I was like, oh my gosh, everybody's like,
the book and Bible study there.
I'm like, I don't know what my purpose is. You know, I do remember feeling very anxious about this. It's like, oh my God, like, what am I? Okay, everybody knows. How come I don't know what my purpose is? What am I supposed to do? I don't know. And by the way, I think I just came to faith anyway, you know, so I'm still trying to just figure out, When
did you come to faith? How old were you?
In college, senior year in college,
wow,
you know, so like 20 years ago now.
Intense times.
Yeah, intense time. I grew up in a church, but I really came to a saving faith in college. So I'm like, God, found my purpose. I just found Jesus. Or Jesus just found me.
That is my purpose. There we go.
That's huge. I mean, is that not enough? And so I do remember, though, being a little anxious about that. I'm like, what do I do? And it wasn't until much later much later on, I remember, or maybe not much later, but maybe early in my walk. And I just remember reading through the scriptures. And I remember Psalm 138:8 being like a balm for me anyway. You know, that the Lord will fulfill his purpose for me. And some of the translations, it translates in that way, which I was like, so this constant quest, this constant obsession with looking everywhere, here, there, everywhere. What am I supposed to do? What am I, you know, looking for jobs? Like, is this the right job for me to take? Am I living in my purpose? It took a lot of weight off of me. And then remembering, I think in Ephesians, just that the Lord has prepared good works for me to walk into. I was like, okay, so I can rest. You know, faith calls us to rest.
And you took those things personally. You read that and you were like, that's for me.
I internalized it. Yeah, I internalized it. I took that on, but I took it on and also was praying for God to show me what my purpose, what does that look like? What do you want me to do? And those things didn't actually really become very clear to me until the end of seminary and like post seminary as well too. Like just my calling with public theology and uplifting the plight and liberation of people of African descent, you know, and doing that type of work and just through the course of life, I've just seen that your purpose, you know, I believe remains firm, but I think sometimes it manifests in different ways in
Right.
different seasons. And it looks like different, you know?
Right.
And so anyway, those scriptures were anchors for me
Right.
and really helped calm me down and just
Yeah.
like, okay, I don't have to go on this obsessive search for my purpose, but pray about it. Ask
Right.
God to reveal that and make that clear. But I can really rest in knowing that the Lord will actually fulfill these, you know, this purpose for me,
Right.
which was helpful. And I hope that's helpful to the listeners too.
Yeah, well, it should be. It's helpful to me. I'm taking it on myself.
Yeah.
I saw a recent major study by an educational psychologist that adolescents who felt a sense of distinct purpose were healthier and happier and more positive, which would be I think people would guess that. But there was also another recent article that cited research that said that 3 out of 5 college students reported lacking purpose. It's like 60%. Here's a quote from the article that I thought was really telling. Quote, "That's sort of a trope in our culture that adolescence is a stormy and difficult time. Kids are moody," this researcher said.
Oh, yes.
I think there's a mythologizing of young adulthood. It can be a wonderful time that's exciting and full of possibility, but it's also these days a really stressful, difficult time for a lot of young people.
That's true.
What do you, as you travel, as you speak, like what kind of unique challenges do you think younger people are facing today that maybe even we didn't face? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely think about the gun violence, you know, on school campuses. These drills that now they have grown accustomed to having to do.
Almost had my daughter's school canceled the other day because of a shooting threat. Merely a threat someone put up. We didn't know if we were going to school or not.
You see?
Just the other day.
Yeah, that is terrible. Like, you know, and so that right there in and of itself is very traumatic. Like, you know, and so that's not something, I don't have like a touch point for that. That was not a reality for me when I was in school at all.
Right.
You know, and so I can't imagine what it means. I mean, we had earthquake drills.
California.
From California. Shout out to
girl.
Cal.
There you
That's
go.
what we had. Not
Yeah.
active shooter drills.
Right.
That is wild. That is not, it does not have to be this way. But that's a whole nother podcast episode.
Supposed to hide,
Yeah.
then fight, or hide, then run, then fight, or some
I don't even
it's
know.
wild.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're supposed to apparently the drill is you're supposed to first get out, and then it's wild that anybody would even try to internalize or think about that. Like I think about
what that does.
I have a middle school daughter
Yeah.
and a sophomore in high school, and thinking of them like imagining themselves hiding from a shooter in a school is even if it's like statistically unlikely, just like whatever.
Whatever.
The thought
yeah.
the thought that gets inside of someone's head.
What does that do to the psyche? You know, what does that do to the body, right? And so that in and of itself
So there's
is
that.
enough,
Yeah.
like for that type of stuff. And then they have social media, right? Now, when I was in school, when I was age, we didn't have social media, you know, like that. We
I
had
praise God for that. At
Yeah.
times.
Me too. Me too. So do I.
Yeah.
But we didn't have that.
You can't delete that. It
Yeah,
lives.
you can't delete
it
that.
lives forever.
You know, I know they say you can't. You know, and so it does. It lives forever. You know, so that's another, thing, the comparisons and the things like that. Your brain is not fully developed. So, the logic is not logicking in the ways that it needs to, and so that's those two components just in and of itself. Then not to mention geopolitics and just what's going on in the world, right? And our political landscape.
Oh, man.
And there's a lot going on.
Also from the article further down, quote, "Young adults are also aware of the tribulations of the world.
Okay.
42% reported the negative influence of gun violence in schools on their mental health. 34% cited climate change, and 30% cited worries, I'm sure unjustified worries, that political leaders are incompetent or corrupt."
Right.
So,
So that's a lot.
that's a lot.
We grew up in a time where, and I'm not saying it was easy. I mean, we've been through a lot of unprecedented times.
Yeah.
A lot of historical events. We were talking, off mic, and I was thinking, is there such thing as historical fatigue?
Oh, yeah.
It's like I'm tired of experiencing history.
Yeah.
Please get us off this roller coaster ride, Lord. And so, it's been like
The Lord has been saying, stay on the roller coaster,
right.
I think.
We're
That's what the Lord has been
Lord.
telling us.
Come get us,
to
right?
ride it.
Like-
He's been telling us to ride it. I mean,
it is riding us. We are tired.
what do you do though with, you must find yourself in situations of spiritual counsel with college age students and people. Like what do you tell them?
Yeah, so for me, I really am always trying to, I don't want to add another burden to them. I was like, just because, you've heard everything that they're going through, right? And the things, we haven't even talked about mental health, the mental health crisis too, right? And the ways in which that's impacting this generation as well. And so we didn't even get to that, so I'm always trying to lighten a burden and a load, and so when it comes to purpose, I'm like, just rest, in God. try to at least discover your passion.
Yeah.
Try at the very least what makes you feel alive, what awakens you, what excites you. Live into that, because that just gives you capacity and some inner resilience to keep going in the midst of all of the things that they're grappling with anyway. And along the way, I just believe that the Lord will absolutely reveal that to them in time. And so that's usually my counsel to them is, don't worry about that. Just live and try to find the joy and cultivate joy as much as you can, so that way you can have the resilience to keep moving forward and keep doing what you need to do. Because during these times, because these are some perilous times, they've been through a lot. And I think there's a sense where like, oh my gosh, these kids are so weak, or they're so, so fragile. And so, which I understand, but we grew up in a different time, and they really do have a lot going on. And there's things that they're experiencing that we did not have to experience.
Right.
So I try to have some empathy on that.
Right.
I really do.
I think we forget sometimes too, like it's too easy for me to forget, at least, like how fragile I was when I was that age, much less calling other people fragile. Like when I was 18, 19, 20, I think I was vulnerable. Like I would have believed any strong message, I think, at some points in my life. Things could have gone in so many different directions. Because there's just like this desire to like attach to something and believe something.
Yeah.
So that desire is there. I think it's not. I don't sense that young people today are like relativists or they don't believe in things. Like you're saying, there's a strong belief. Like the idea, like when we were growing up, I think the thing that people used to say, like to me at least, the idea is like that relativism or atheism, like those were the big enemies. Like you can't just believe anything. It's like, oh no. I see teenagers today, they believe things.
Yeah.
They believe things hard.
Hard.
Like really hard, like maybe even beyond the maturity level, right? Like,
right.
But that's that idea that used to be seen as like the enemy, like this apathy and so on. And I don't see that. I see a lot of anxiety though.
A lot of anxiety.
A lot of anxiety.
Yeah, I do see a lot of anxiety, and so I think in a lot of ways I'm just trying to encourage them, keep going, like life, it does get better. Just trying to encourage them, because I think you can fall into this like hole of like despair and despondency. And I'm like, oh no, you will get through this. Like, you just keep on going. That's why I really am like, you gotta try to cultivate joy, as much as you can, because, and you gotta fight for that.
Yeah.
Or else, because it's just not, it's just not something that just happens.
Right.
Typically, organically. You got to fight for that, and go after it. And so that's something I'm always trying to, get them to understand and just, and just trust, and you can rest, and believe that the Lord really is ordering your footsteps, and that God will actually bring you on the path of purpose that God's intended for you. Which I know might be hard for people to believe. I'm like, God actually cares about every detail of your life. Believe it or not, your life is not insignificant to God. Maybe it's insignificant to other people, but it's not insignificant to God. And I think that's hard to sometimes wrap, their mind around. But I try to, encourage them. Yeah. In those ways that they have a gift to offer all of us, that we can all benefit from. And so, and if we lose you, then we lose that,
that's good stuff.
And
that's really good.
You're more than your gift, but just let them know they have a purpose,
How did you experience the transition from going to school, going to college, having that wrestling, going to seminary? You went to seminary, get those degrees, and then you come out and there's like this work world, and there's a lot of pressure to like find your thing, find your job. And you ended up choosing kind of a different path in life, actually one that's become increasingly popular, I think, for a lot of people, which is not to just like link yourself to a job or institution. But really, I think in your work, you do a lot of different things and work with and for lots of different people for lots of different reasons. Like, how did you make that transition? Was there like a temptation to just settle down in something? Did you transition into that, out of that? Like, how did that work for you?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a multi-hyphenate, by God's grace. And so it was not my choice. It was not my choice. I mean, I grew up as a latchkey kid. I did not have money growing up. And so I'm like, I value financial stability.
Go make money.
Exactly. Yep. That is the point. Yep. That's why I did business marketing in undergrad. There's a reason why. Yep. And I was in sales jobs. There's a reason for that.
I could see you doing that.
Yeah, I was a salesperson.
Yeah.
Well, once a salesperson, was a salesperson, but now I just preach the gospel. Yeah. So I'm giving you Jesus. But yeah, so So I went into seminary. Before I went to seminary as a sales executive, did pharmaceutical sales. Before that, outside
Pharmaceutical sales. That's big time.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah. So I did that outside business to business salesperson. And so went into seminary, 4-year program. I said, okay, last year of my program, last semester, I was like, let me start looking for jobs. I'm going back into pharmaceutical sales. That's what I know. And so applying. I've got the numbers. I've got the, everything.
Right.
I can account for the gap. I've been in school, but nothing was coming my way. I was applying for it had to be 20 jobs a week. I mean, just putting in resumes. Nothing was coming my way. And I was like, why? What is, wasn't understanding. Like, this is my career path is sales. That's what I know. And the door wasn't open. And so, but in the midst of that time in seminary, unfortunately, the deaths of Michael Brown had occurred right before I came in to start seminary. Trayvon Martin had been killed. And so the Black Lives Matter movement really launched and, hit its, I would say, maybe its peak, around that time or maybe right after. And I would just remember writing about, state-sanctioned violence for op-eds and people would see that and be like, oh, we want to bring you in to speak. Right. Wow. This is back when the conference circuit was what it was. And so I go in and speak and get paid for that and write op-eds and not a lot of money though. And so I was like, okay, Lord, wait, is this what I'm going to be doing? Because hello, what are we going to, how am I going to survive?
You didn't see a vision for that as like a full-time thing. You were affected by major political events that affected you, affected your community, affected everybody. Yeah. And thought, hey, I'm expressing myself, and people picked up on that. Yeah. So they saw something.
The right thing to do.
They saw something that was natural to what you cared about. And
I was passionate about it. So I wrote about it and do those things.
I mean, I think there's a story. There's like a miniature story. I should continue this story, but there's a miniature story right there that I don't want to miss, which is that just reacting to the world in faith, in who you are, and sharing that. It doesn't. I mean, just doing that is, in fact, finding a purpose.
There you go. Right? Yeah. Unbeknownst to me. So at least at the time, And so, Bible talks about how your gifts will make room for you. But I didn't know that me just speaking out on these things that I was very passionate about would open those types of doors for me. So anyway, I say I fell into it, but the Lord had already ordained this, for me to be doing this public theology work because I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time. I just was speaking out, was passionate about these things. I did not continue to see my people oppressed in those ways, and I was using my voice. Right. You know what I mean? Using the gifts that God gave me, writing and speaking, all of those things. Right. And then, this life, public theology is what I've shaped. I guess in the words of Lucille Clifton, it's what I've shaped into a kind of life by God's grace. That's her poem. Won't you celebrate with me? Yeah. And so, that. I remember throughout seminary praying though too, like Lord, why am I in seminary? I didn't feel a call to the pastorate. I didn't feel a call to preach. So I was like, what am I even doing here? But I knew that the Lord had called me to seminary. So I was like, okay, I just thought I was a Bible teacher back at church, serving my church work. Right. That's not what happened. That's not the way that the Lord, planned for it, at least at this juncture in my life. And so that was kind of perplexing, to me, because I was praying all the time, like, what am I doing here? I know you wanted me here, but what am I supposed to do with this? What do you want me to do? I'm so confused. Right. I'm so confused. Like, what are we doing, God?
But did that manifest for you as a sense of purposelessness? Like you felt like you were looking for it, or did you feel that sense of purpose or calling through it, or how did you?
Well, yes and no. It wasn't a purposelessness because I knew I was supposed to be there at the seminary. That was clear to me. But it was like, what are we doing after this, though?
So is that look to the next horizon?
That's the next step. It was toward the second half, right? Halfway in or 3/4 into the program, 4-year program. And I'm like, okay, so what's the next, the next step, And so just praying about that and praying and then not knowing that this was the path, the unbeaten, path was what the Lord had chosen.
Did you find that other people were uncomfortable with your career state, family, friends? Were they looking at you like, hey, you should do this? Or were people pretty affirming of what the path you were taking?
Yeah, they were a little confused,
Sometimes it's other people sometimes it's other people who give us that sense that maybe it's like, I thought I had a purpose, but now you said it, you don't think I do. And it's like,
yeah, it's true. No, you're right. No, I think my family was kind of perplexed when I was going to seminary. They're like, wait, what? You're going to go to be a a pastor? What do you mean?
Yeah.
Lutheran, like more conservative things. Like, what do you mean women can't be pastors? I was like, well, I'm not going to be a pastor, so whatever. You know, so, but my grandfather was also a seminary grad, so the anointing doesn't fall too far from the tree.
From the tree. Yeah, that's
you know,
right.
but yeah, at first they were confused, but I was like, I'm also confused. I don't know. I didn't really fault them because I was like, I'm also confused in following God. I don't know where God's taking me to go. I'm going to a land that I know not, called Philadelphia. And that's what we're going to do, you know? And so in some ways, I didn't really take offense or at their confusion because I was like, I'm confused too. But I just know that this is where I'm supposed to go. And that's what I'm going to do. And I trust that the Lord will show me the next steps. And eventually, God did, you know.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of wrestling there, right?
Well,
you know?
I hear in that too advice for younger people, college students, or even for parents to pass on to their kids, which is like, instead of getting defensive about confusion or having to smother confusion with an answer, just being like, yeah, that's exactly right. I'm confused.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
I'm right there with you.
That's
you
exactly.
know?
I think.
But they supported me too.
Yeah.
But they supported me in that confusion, even though they were still confused. Like, okay, they're like, we know you love Jesus. This is very serious. You really do love Jesus. You know, you're going,
Absolutely.
and you're going. But they were still, even though they were confused, they were still like, well, I'm proud of you that you're still going, and you know, and whatnot. And even through the years, they've been like, you know, supportive and prayerful and whatnot. And so grateful for that.
I have not.
Everybody can't say that.
I have not gotten far enough in the parenting journey to claim any victories at all. But I do have a teenage daughter, and I do know that some of my budding, you know, as she grows up, like some of my what at least for me felt like some of the deeper moments of connection along the journey so far have been precisely as a parent admitting vulnerabilities or fears or just being like, yeah, this thing I don't understand at all.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I mean, there's a sense I think in which younger people have to understand that like we and those who are our elders, they don't know. They don't know either. They don't know. I mean, we don't know. We're doing this. You go to church, right? And you think, oh, there's always like somebody who's the pastor, somebody who's the elder, or you work in an institution and you think, oh, there'll be somebody who will always kind of be in some office and they're like, da, da, da,
they know.
They know. And I think as you go forward in life and do things, it's not nobody knows. It's not tearing anyone down to say, I don't think. You realize though, nobody knows. They don't know. I went to a major conference recently.
So true. It's like, nobody knows.
I went to a major conference recently in a field last spring. Major people, biggest people in the world talking about a topic. And it dawned on me. I was like, they don't know. They do not know. And they're saying explicitly, and you know how I knew that they don't know? They were saying, quote, I don't know what I'm talking about. Like they literally didn't know. And to me, that was really, I don't know, it kind of put us all in this same kind of struggle together. And that really helped me.
Yeah. The mystery of life is such a great, the great equalizer, right? So, you know, when you're so much younger, you think adults know everything, and adults act like they know, they project that they know.
Yeah.
But then you get into adulthood, you're like, what the heck? I don't know what I'm doing. You don't know what you're doing. None of us know what we're doing. What is happening? Lord, help, come get us. But it's true.
I want to try out this idea on you that I thought about a lot lately. And I want to ask you, I want to trot out an idea about what purpose and meaning starts to look like later in life as we become real proper adults.
Right.
This is an idea that I think is often attributed to someone like Carl Jung, the psychologist in the 20th century, or even this guy named Joseph Campbell, who kind of popularized this as a kind of template for a journey into purpose. And I started to wonder, and especially talking to you here, someone who's different from me in some key ways, I wondered if this is like a very white male way of thinking of the world, or I wondered if actually this had a bigger application. So I wonder what you think. So the story goes something like this. It's like this heroic kind of journey. I know it already sounds like white and male. Heroes, we have to be heroes. But the idea is that you grow up in a family, and something drives you from your community. You have to leave your community. It no longer can contain you, or maybe you feel like you've been wronged or something, and you leave your home and you go out somewhere and you gather tools. You gather, this is like in the kind of heroic quest, you get weaponry and you get riches. And you find your people. Maybe it involves finding a spouse, maybe not. I think in the classic form, it probably does, for the man acquiring the wife, Right. And you get these tools and these weapons, and then you come back to your community, and then you bestow your gifts upon your community, and you defeat the haters from the community, which could be symbolic, of just like fear or different kinds of problems. And you come back and you establish yourself, and you basically give those benefits back. Does that kind of journey make sense to you and the way that you've thought about your life? Are there elements of that connect with you, or does that sound just like a totally foreign? Because the idea of the second half of life is that now you can settle down. You're done acquiring, building, climbing, grabbing. We can imagine a time when it's like, hey, when do I start giving back? And when do I stop for myself, like being so clingy and grabby about everything around me and start to just
Yeah.
live and also mentor other people too
Yeah.
and make that turn. I wondered what elements of that long-winded
No,
story make sense to
yeah.
you and which elements don't.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always been a both and. It's never been yeah, I think I've always been by God's grace been giving back in some as
Mm.
a there's kind of like an adage in our community of lifting as we climb.
Mm.
And so there's always this both and
Yeah.
together, and I really do live by that motto.
Mm.
And so
Not just climbing or not just building and not just
no,
giving, but both of those things.
yeah, both those
always.
things at the same time.
They link together.
So yeah, so I think even as I was, praying about my purpose and clamoring and trying to figure that out, and going through seminary and the grueling, nature of that. I was still serving in my local church. I was still serving, the saints. I was still mentoring and still pouring into people's lives and being poured into, from my mentor as well. And so it was always a both and. It was never really, and I don't know if it was really so much about acquisition. I don't know that I really, I think because my life had just shifted, so much into just straight ministry instead out of the corporate world. It was no longer about money or a retirement or any of that.
That's a building world.
That's a building world.
So you lived in that world. I mean, so that does make sense. That idea that you'd spend a lot of time on yourself trying to make things happen, and make money and doing that kind of stuff.
And then got pulled out like really suddenly. I mean, and without warning, right? So it was like they got rid of our whole sales team without warning.
Oh wow!
The day before my birthday, so it was like,
oh,
whoa, like So I was like, wait, what? In your 20s, so you're not even you've barely built, like and just been pulled out and into a different world.
Kind of in a way though, looking back, I mean, kind of a gift though in a way to see that in fact that world that seems so permanent and whatever is not that they can just take it away at any point.
It's not. I learned. So I was like, oh no, none of this is nothing lasts forever.
Yeah.
It's pretty traumatic, but it was like, oh, okay, yeah, my dependency has got to be on God.
I think at least for men, in my experience, this is what people talk about when they talk about a midlife crisis. They talk about this breakdown moment where you kind of are like building and grabbing and taking and trying to do all this stuff, blah, 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 blah. But then you realize that it's not permanent and that you could lose it. And to have earlier experiences where you realize this, maybe it's for some people through, I don't know, through childbirth or through, where you realize like the limits of one's body and control over your life. And maybe certain kinds of people, maybe people like me are allowed to live under the illusion that they do control their life and that things are really working and so on, when actually underneath it all, it's pretty shallow.
It is,
and that can happen too,
Yeah. So it was quite a lesson to learn, in at that point. But I mean, I'm grateful for it because I've always just been like, okay, God, open hand.
Yeah.
I got an open-handed grace now because I'm like, you never know. The Lord giveth and the Lord does indeed take away. Okay. And so it's like, whatever you want to do, God. Because it's better to have an open hand than a tight hand. Because I'm just like, that's what I've learned. Open hand with God.
Right.
Because you just don't know, right? Things are always changing.
I appreciate the journey insofar as it's brought you here to visit with us and talk about this.
Yeah.
I want to ask you in closing, I know you've written and spoken about this issue of just like disappointment with God and disappointment along the way that we experience. And as we close here and we think about the hard journey it is to find purpose, I wonder what you could say to us by way of consolation or encouragement about times when it does feel disappointing to find a purpose, or maybe even for older people when that purpose seems to break down and it's like, I thought I had a thing and now I don't.
It's so hard. Yeah, I mean, it's just like life can just change on a dime, and I think that's always just, it's just so, it can be traumatic, it can be very disorienting. There's a book by one of my dear friends, Lisa Fields, which I recommend, When Faith Disappoints.
Oh.
And she talks about, purpose and personhood and provision. Will God provide my need for my needs? Will God, what's my purpose? And, why am I here, basically? Right. And then I think about just some other resources and things that I can't remember the name, but there's other book, When God Interrupts, where it's just like, where God just comes in and shakes up your world. Like, and you're like, oh my goodness, like, in some very unimaginable, ways. So I think about people who've lost their children. Their only child, like, what does that do to you? Like, how does that change you fundamentally, as a purpose, as a person or your health, right? One day you could see, next day you can't.
Right.
You know, what does that do, you know,
Right.
to someone? So you think about the micro and the macro, significant seismic shifts in, in life. And
Right.
so when I think about that, I just think about, I think I try to encourage people as much as they can, to pour out their heart, their frustration, their anger, everything, to God. There's no sense in hiding it because God already knows, and like you're not gonna like scare God. God's not gonna back up, on you,
Mm.
like God could take it. But there's something God is doing in the midst of the suffering, because that's really what some of this stuff brings us to. We have these moments that bring us down to our knees and makes us go, who am I?
Right.
Ask God, who am I and why am I here? And
Right.
it really can bring us down
Right.
to our knees. And that was even my message earlier, just about what it means to cultivate joy-filled suffering. How do we suffer well? How do we count our trials? How do we count it as all joy? How do we do that? Well, we look to Jesus' example, right? For the joy set before him, he went to the cross and scorned the shame. And he suffered and he died for us in Gethsemane. Like you think about Gethsemane and and him asking God 3 times, like, if you will let this cup pass, like,
Yeah.
nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. The agony, the despair, the depression, that he was really grabbing, the weight of the world,
Right.
On his shoulder. But yet he still had joy. There was still joy because joy has a future orientation. It's not necessarily that you're happy in that moment, but that no, there's something greater, and if I can just get over, if I can just get through, that joy will be made complete in God, of course, and so I think in some ways I'm always just trying to encourage people to keep moving toward the light, and God does give us enough light for the next step on our paths, so because everybody's in different places, and in life, you're in a suffering, you're out of one, you're trying to find your purpose, you don't know what you're doing, we don't know which way to go, we don't know what to do, but God is faithful, and he sends I believe divine helpers, along the way, so do we have the discernment to know when God has sent us help? Or do we despise the helpers God has sent because they didn't come in the package we thought? Think about the fact that the Hebrews, I think, says that we entertain angels unaware.
Oh yeah.
And so
Yeah.
do we have eyes to see these angels when they're coming into our lives? What do we do?
Yeah.
When they come
Right.
to give us,
Right.
God, I think God really does arrange divine appointments, for us. So do we have are we in tune with the Spirit, enough to know when God has done that? Sometimes we're only able to perceive that sometimes in hindsight, but when it happens, are we able to give God glory too, and thank God and give God our gratitude
Right.
when he sends that help?
Yeah.
So that's the thing, So anyway, there was a lot, but I just think that I just know that there's a lot of things that people are dealing with,
Yeah.
and that comes to mind. It's just I know there's been a lot of deaths, a lot of grief that people are grappling with, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of political volatility, a lot of violence in the land, right? With these shootings, campus shootings. So I'm always just thinking, I was like, people are carrying so much more than we even know.
Yeah.
And that they're even willing to confess and to share.
Yeah.
But where can we see God,
Yeah.
in that?
Ekemini, thank you for these deep and faithful words, and may some things that you've said here today be a blessing.
Amen.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.